content within this show may contain graphic or disturbing details of real life cases. Viewer and listener discretion is advised. July 11th, 1985, Millington, Tennessee. A young woman in a red Marine Corps t-shirt ties her sneakers and steps out into the humid summer night. She's just one day away from graduating from avionics training at the Naval Air Station, a moment she's been dreaming about for years. But this will be her last run. Around 10 o'clock, two Marines jogging in the opposite direction spot her passing under the base lights. Red shirt, red shorts, hair pulled back, focused, strong. They keep running until they hear something that makes their blood run cold. In the distance, a female screaming. They stop in their tracks. They look toward the sound, and in the dark, they see a car. Inside, the shape of a man's arm around a woman. They turn and run toward the noise, hearts pounding, but ready to take action, just like anyone trained for combat would do. But by the time they reach the spot, the car is gone. By sunrise, the peace of Millington would shatter forever. They say the South never forgets, and Tennessee, she remembers everything. Welcome to Tennessee True Crime, where the shadows of the volunteer state's past meet the stories that refuse to be forgotten. I'm your host, Tiffany Morgan. Each week, we dig into twisted tales of betrayal, violence, and mystery, the ones where whispers carry truth, and the answers are never as simple as they seem. Let's step into the dark and piece together the clues, because in Tennessee, some secrets still haunt the hills. This is Tennessee True Crime.
Down through the smoky hollers where the cold wind sighs, footsteps fall where the moonlight hides, whispers over rivers, a secret lost in time. Welcome to Tennessee True Crime.
There have been many people called to serve this country. Men and women from every corner of the U.S. who choose to put on the uniform, knowing full well they may not come home. They leave their families, the safety of their homes, for you and I. 19-year-old Lance Corporal Suzanne Marie Collins was one of them. Suzanne was adopted by Trudy and Jack Collins and her brother Stephen too, and together they lived a life full of movement and discovery. Her father, an attorney and foreign service officer, took them overseas to Greece and then back to Wisconsin before settling in Virginia. Suzanne was bright and bubbly and always ready to help. Her friends described her as a beam of light, that girl who laughed easily but worked harder, the girl who knew how to have fun but not take life too seriously. So when Suzanne announced she was joining the Marines, people were shocked. Not because she wasn't capable, but because it wasn't what anyone expected. Suzanne, she wanted to fly. She wanted to serve. Connor, can you switch over to my computer so we can show a picture of Suzanne? So, as you can see, she was a beautiful young woman with fire in her eyes, and her dream was to become one of the first female Marine fighter pilots. Suzanne was stationed in Millington, Tennessee, which is a small base town just north of Memphis, and by all accounts, she excelled. She was on what's called the honor desk, which is a recognition that meant academic excellence, leadership, and the kind of discipline that Marines thrive on. But on that July night, Suzanne traded her flight suit for running shoes. She left her barracks just after 10 o'clock for a late night jog. Red Marine shirt, red shorts, white socks, tennis shoes. And she never came back. Now, 2 other Marines, Private First Class Michael Howard and Private First Class Mark Shotwell, were also out jogging that night. And they saw Suzanne jogging south. And then they saw a car. It was a wood-paneled station wagon heading in Suzanne's direction. And moments later, the screams came. Now, just like any good Marines would do, they turned around and ran toward the sound. They saw the car pulled into the grass on the wrong side of the road. A man and a woman inside, and the man's arm was around the woman. But then the car sped off into the darkness. Now, the 2 Marines ran to the nearest gate and gave a full report to security. The description of the car, wood grain paneling, Kentucky license plates. I mean, it was distinct enough that security guards recognized it from earlier in the evening. So a bolo went out, which means be on the lookout for that vehicle. And not long after, investigators found it. So that car belonged to Sedley and Lynn Alley, which were a couple living right there on the base. Lynn was in the Navy, and Sedley worked maintenance as a heating and air repairman. At about 1 a.m, officers knocked on their door. The couple answered, and both were calm and cooperative. They said they'd been in an argument later that night. Voices raised, maybe even screams, and that, they said, must have been what those Marines heard. And with that, security feels confident that the issue had been reasonably explained. No one was missing, so there was no reason to suspect anything worse. And, of course, the report was dropped. Now, at around 5 a.m., Suzanne's roommate woke up. Suzanne's bed was untouched. Her things were still there, and her uniform was folded neatly on the bed. This is when the roommate realized she didn't think Suzanne had come back that night. Now, the roommate was concerned, obviously, and so she called base security. Now, and here's a little Mama T truth moment. When grown adults go missing, police don't always take it seriously right away. It's not that they are ignoring the fact that something could be wrong or that they don't want to work the case. However, sometimes they assume the person's out. They've met someone. Maybe they've gotten themselves into a one-night situationship, or maybe they just needed space. I mean, there are plenty of people who take a little time away because they don't want to be found. And from what I've read, Suzanne was involved with someone. But this was a Marine base, so this was a little different. This was not normal behavior for Suzanne, especially not on the morning of what would have been her graduation. So security, they took it very seriously. An all-points bulletin went out across the base, but not only on the base. It was also sent to the Millington Police Department and also to the Shelby County Sheriff's Department. At dawn, search teams began scouring the area. They wasted no time, and just beyond the base, at Edmund Orgel Park, less than an hour after Suzanne was reported missing, they found her. Suzanne was lying face down, about 150 yards from the road, her clothes scattered around her. Next to her body lay a pair of men's red underwear. Suzanne had been brutally beaten. Her injuries were so severe that even photographs couldn't identify her. I mean, the scene was horrific. It was the kind of thing that changes every investigator who sees it. Now, suddenly, that story that Sedley and Lynn Alley told the night before, well, it didn't seem so harmless anymore. The car, the screams, the timing, And with that in mind, military police went straight back to his quarters. Mr. Alley was questioned again, but this time, 29-year-old Sedley Alley was placed under arrest. Military police read him his Miranda rights. Now, at first, he repeated the same thing he and Lynn stated the night before. An argument with his wife. He was mad she'd gone to a Tupperware party. It was a simple misunderstanding. You know how it goes. Wrong place, wrong time. But as questioning went on, Sedley's story shifted. He eventually admitted he'd been drinking heavily that night. Beer and wine, enough to black out. He said that despite his condition, he'd gotten in his car and gone for a drive around the base. He said he was depressed. He said he was angry. He said he was lonely. He missed his family, all of which lived in Kentucky, by the way, even his 2 children who he had with his first wife, a woman by the name of Deborah. Sedley was torn between going to Kentucky, staying where he was, or driving his car into a wall to kill himself. Sedley said instead of those options, he decided to just pull over and run. Now, he claimed that the jogger in her red shirt and red shorts had ran alongside him for a while. He even said that they'd had brief conversation. But eventually, with Sedley being much more out of shape than Suzanne, she was training for the Marines, Sedley said that he got tired from running, so he turned around and went back to his car. Still drunk, still driving. And then, he claimed, he felt a thud, and that's when he realized he'd hit the jogger. Now, Sedley said when he heard the thud, he stopped and got out of the car. He said when he got out of the car, she was rolling around and screaming. And I'm sure she was. I can imagine she was obviously irritated with him at the least. And I'm sure she was also in quite a bit of pain. Now, Sedley said he panicked. He put her in the car to take her to the hospital. But when she called him a drunken bastard and threatened to report him, he lost control. He didn't turn to go to the hospital. He turned to go to the lake. Sedley confessed that he struck her several times with his fist after hitting her with his car while they were in the car and, quote, stuck a screwdriver in the side of her head. But the autopsy, well, it told a much darker story. Dr. James Bell, who was the pathologist, he testified that Suzanne had suffered multiple fatal injuries. She'd been beaten, strangled, and violated in a way far too graphic for most of us to comprehend. Suzanne had bruises and abrasions over the entirety of her body, front and back. There were also bruises on the victim's neck, consistent with strangulation. And as for that screwdriver, Dr. Bell testified that the injuries to the skull could have been inflicted by the rounded end of the defendant's screwdriver that was found near the scene, by the way, but not by the pointed end like Sedley had originally stated. The worst of it, Suzanne had also been sexually assaulted with the use of a tree branch. Dr. Bell was eventually able to identify the branch, which had been broken off a nearby tree where she lay. The tree branch, which was inserted into the victim's body through her genitalia, it measured 31 inches in length and had been inserted into her body more than once to a depth of 20 inches. Now, this, of course, had severely injured Suzanne's internal organs, including tearing through her abdomen and rupturing her lung, which caused tremendous hemorrhaging. To make matters even worse, the pathologist was of the opinion that Suzanne was still alive when the tree limb was inserted into her body. Now, Dr. Bell, as you can imagine, called it the worst case that he'd ever seen. Sedley Alley led investigators to the scene. He pointed out the exact tree where the branch had been broken off that matched the wounds. He even showed them where he left her body. Everything fit. It was enough to charge him with kidnapping, aggravated rape, and first-degree murder. Case closed, right? But in Tennessee and with the justice system, as we all know, nothing is ever that simple. So in the Shelby County courtroom, the evidence from the case was laid out piece by piece. The prosecution argued that Sedley Alley's actions were absolutely deliberate. They were not accidental, and they were not out of drunken confusion. The prosecution argued that he'd stalked Suzanne Collins and abducted her, that he'd carried out one of the most brutal murders in Tennessee history. The defense countered that Sedley was drunk and deeply intoxicated and mentally unstable. They said that his confession wasn't reliable at all. Sedley had been confused and manipulated, maybe even coerced by police into admitting to things that he didn't even remember doing. Now, witnesses described seeing that same wood-paneled station wagon the night that Suzanne disappeared. And we keep hearing about the car, so Connor, let's switch to my computer and show a picture of the station wagon. Now, if you're like me, you want to see all the photos that you can to connect to the case and be able to visualize the details. Now, forensic experts had already tied fibers and soil samples from Alley's car to the crime scene. And then, there was his own voice, his own confession that played for the jury. How do you deny that? The jury, they didn't deliberate long. They found Sedley Alley guilty of kidnapping, aggravated rape, and premeditated first-degree murder. They also found two aggravating factors. One, that the murder was especially heinous, atrocious, and cruel. And two, that it was committed during a kidnapping and a rape. The sentence, death by lethal injection. Now, justice, if that's what you call it, didn't come quickly. You see, Sedley Alley sat on death row for nearly 2 decades, which was as long as Suzanne was able to live on this earth. Appeal after appeal came, hearing after hearing, constantly trying to get a different circumstance for Sedley. And every single time this happened, he would claim innocence, or at least uncertainty. Sedley said that he'd been coerced and that he'd been drunk and that he was confused. And he even said that details from his own confession didn't match the evidence. And, the thing is, some didn't. You remember those red men's underwear found by Suzanne's body? They were never tested for DNA. Stains on her shirt, the victim's bra, blood found on the grass under her genitalia. These are all things that Sedley was asking for to be tested. And here's some info to chew on. The tire tracks found at the crime scene were not from Mr. Sedley Alley's vehicle, and recovered shoe prints were inconsistent with his shoes. In addition, autopsy reports did not even support the fact that Suzanne had been hit by a car. Had police led their suspect, Sedley Alley, to the area where Suzanne was found? Had they fed him information and coerced his confession and just gotten a welcomed and swift arrest? Now, key eyewitness accounts do not match Mr. Alley. A witness described a man near where Miss Collins was abducted as 5'6" to 5'8" tall, with short brown hair and a dark complexion, who drove a station wagon. Mr. Alley, he was 6 feet 4 inches tall. He had red, medium-length hair and a light complexion. Now, let's switch to my computer here to show you a picture of Sedley Alley with his daughter, April. So this was 1985 when this happened. So as we know, this was before modern DNA testing. The science simply wasn't there yet, but evidence from the crimes were still kept sitting and waiting. And as the years passed, the technology caught up. There was now a way to get answers. Now, by the early 2000s, DNA could do what eyewitnesses and confessions could not. It could confirm or clear someone once and for all. Now, Sedley claimed that he had no motive to kill Suzanne Collins and even offered an alternate suspect. Sedley claimed the guy that Suzanne had been seeing, he had motive, and guess what kind of car he drove? You got it, a station wagon with wood grain paneling. We'll be back. So Sedley filed motion after motion to have this evidence tested. And in 2006, just weeks before his scheduled execution, then sitting Governor Phil Bredesen granted a 15-day reprieve, which is basically just a brief pause. They put the execution on hold momentarily so that Sedley Alley's team could formally request DNA testing on that untested evidence. It was a small victory, but it didn't last. Now, the state argued that testing wasn't necessary, that it wouldn't change the outcome, and the Tennessee courts, well, they agreed. Now, let's imagine for a minute that you're on death row. Now, imagine that you're on death row and you're innocent. We all know people have been wrongfully convicted. It happens. Through various data sources, we know that there's a high risk of executing an innocent person under America's death penalty system. Now, to date, 174 innocent people have been exonerated from death row. Imagine how many have not, that maybe should have been. What if you were in those shoes and you knew you should be exonerated, but instead you were going to die for something you had no hand in? Well, on June 26, 2006, Sedley's appeals were denied for the final time. 2 days later, on June 28th, Sedley Alley was executed by lethal injection at Riverbend Maximum Security Institution in Nashville. His last meal? Pizza pockets, ice cream, 2 iced oatmeal cookies, and milk. In his final statement, Sedley spoke to his 2 children, April and David, who had their hands on the window of the execution room. He told them to stay strong and stay together and that he loved them. And then at 2:12 a.m., Sedley was pronounced dead. Peering through the window of the execution chamber, Paul Dennis Reed, who we'll cover on another episode of Tennessee True Crime. Now, you might think with Sedley's execution, that's the end of the story, but not for everyone. Sedley's daughter, April Alley, or April McIntyre as she is also known, well, she never stopped believing that her father was innocent, or at least that he deserved the chance to prove it. April had lost touch with her father for years, and now that she'd gotten the chance to rekindle their relationship before his passing, she intended to do right by him. See, April believed in her father, and she believed that he should have never been denied his appeals. Now, April currently is hesitant to make statements on camera regarding her involvement, but working with the Innocence Project, she's fought for years to have that evidence tested, even after his death. Now, the Innocence Project, if you've never heard of it, it's a nonprofit organization that's dedicated to exonerating wrongfully convicted individuals through DNA testing, and they also advocate for criminal justice reform. It was founded in 1992 by attorneys Barry Scheck and Peter Newfield. Now, the Innocence Project has played a pivotal role in addressing wrongful convictions in the United States. It utilizes DNA evidence and other scientific advancements to prove the innocence of individuals who have been wrongfully convicted. Since its inception, the Innocence Project has helped to exonerate over 300 individuals who collectively spent more than 3,700 years wrongfully behind bars. Now, Attorney Paul Clement of Kirkland and Ellis, who led arguments for the Innocence Project on behalf of Miss Alley, said, quote, "I have as much sympathy for the victims of a crime as imaginable, but their interests are not served if the wrong person has been executed for the crime and the actual perpetrator is at large." End quote. Now, under the 2011 ruling in Powers v. State, Tennessee's post-conviction DNA law provides for testing of the evidence in Mr. Alley's case. The state's post-conviction DNA analysis statute allows for requests for testing to determine innocence at any time. I mean, it would be absurd to deny testing of the evidence because Mr. Alley was already executed. Though the test can no longer save his life, it can reveal the truth. Either he did it or he didn't. But 2011 was too late for Sedley. He was already dead. Now, had Sedley been alive at that time this ruling was made, none of this would even be a discussion. In 2019, April's legal team petitioned the Tennessee courts again to reopen the case. And the state's response, quote, "This court does not wish to minimize the Alley family's sincerely held belief that Sedley Alley is innocent of the rape and murder of Lance Corporal Collins. However, state law does not permit the estate of a deceased inmate to file the petition for DNA testing on his behalf, so the court has no jurisdiction to consider the petition." End quote. I mean, I don't know about you guys, but I don't understand this. They won't allow for DNA testing, not even with new information that possibly pointed to new suspects. This blows my mind. So, according to CourthouseNews.com, in November 2019, Innocence Project co-founder Barry Scheck received a call from St. Louis investigators. They wanted to discuss the possible connection to Suzanne Collins' murder and a suspect that was incarcerated there in Missouri by the name of Thomas Bruce. Now, Thomas had been charged with sexually assaulting 2 women and killing a third at a Catholic supply store there around 2018. Well, the connection? Thomas Bruce had attended the same avionics training course as Suzanne, right there in Millington, Tennessee. Now, in addition to Thomas Bruce, they suggested Miss Collins' boyfriend also had motive. See, he had admitted that he was with Lance Corporal Collins on the day of the murder. Also, he matched the description of the eyewitnesses as opposed to Sedley Alley, and as we previously stated, he owned an automobile that fit the description, a station wagon with wood grain paneling. Now, this boyfriend also thought that he was exclusively dating Miss Collins, but she, in fact, had plans to move to California to marry a different man. Could he have been a scorned lover? Let this all sink in for a minute. If Sedley was innocent, we may never know. And if he was guilty, the DNA could have confirmed that too. We'll be back. Now, if someone else had committed this crime and their DNA is now in CODIS, which is the Combined DNA Index System, that match could pop up and put some major questions to rest. What if you had a family member in those shoes? I'm going to tell y'all right now, if my family member were in the same situation, I would be fighting tooth and nail to have that evidence tested if I believed that they were innocent. And what if? Imagine you've had a family member killed and it could have been prevented due to additional DNA testing in this case, because that same evidence could reveal another person's DNA. I mean, either way, I'd be livid. Why not just test it and get some finality? Well, that question still hangs in the air. And the evidence is there. Again, some evidence that has never been tested. There were skin cells, sweat from the men's red underwear that were found next to the victim's body that were believed to have been worn by the assailant. There's blood or skin cells, if I could talk, there's blood or skin cells on the tree branch used to violate the victim, including the paper in which the stick was wrapped. There was material from underneath the fingernails of the victim. Now, Sedley and his team had already asserted that these items, in addition to the swabs from the victim, possibly containing semen, could be subjected to STR DNA testing to conclusively prove or disprove Sedley's innocence. Now, he also requested DNA testing on blood and hair found on his car that were directly linked to the victim at trial, but his team stated that those results were obtained using primitive testing techniques, and turns out, guys, those belong to an animal. In addition, Allie also contended that the court must consider the following. There was evidence that the medical examiner had determined that Suzanne had died between 1:30 a.m. and 3:30 p.m. Now, contrary to the state's theory at the trial that the victim had died at 11:30 p.m., an expert witness, Dr. Richard Leo, had determined that Sedley's confession was unreliable and not true, and hairs and fingerprints found on the items near and on the victim's body did not belong to Sedley Allie. Sedley didn't have any luck getting these things done, so his daughter still fought. Can you imagine having someone say to you, if this were your father or brother or son, testing these things won't make a difference? Well, how do you know until you test it? I know I wouldn't stop until I had answers. And maybe you're like me and the first thing you thought is, I'll pay for the testing with my own money. You choose the lab. Well, that option had been offered and denied too. Hey, do I know if Sedley Allie was guilty or not without having been there at the trial to hear the entirety of the evidence? No, I don't. But boy, do I have some major questions. Heck yes, I do. If these same things had been presented at trial with inconsistent or conflicting DNA results, that would have been my reasonable doubt right there. I wouldn't feel satisfied with so many unanswered questions. Now, April continues to carry on seeking answers for her father because although it can't bring him back to life, it could clear his name. And can you imagine what a relief that would be for her and her brother? But here's where the story takes an even darker turn. And to be frank, just as I was starting to at least question things regarding Sedley's involvement in Suzanne Collins' murder, well, this gives me a few more questions about Sedley's guilt. Now, when we were establishing the backstory of Sedley Allie, as I mentioned before, he had been married once prior to Lynn. His first wife, Deborah, well, their marriage didn't end because of irreconcilable differences or a mutual split. See, poor Sedley had become a widower. Just 3 days after filing for divorce from Sedley, there Deborah lay, dead in the bathtub. Now, Sedley told investigators that Deborah had been drinking and out with other men and that she'd come home intoxicated and she just simply drowned in the tub. But the medical examiner noted bruises and strangulation marks. A French fry stuck in her throat. She had asphyxiated on her own vomit. Now, Deborah's death was ruled questionable. Even more questionable, why did Sedley wait hours to call 911? But Sedley was never charged. Now, years later, his second wife, Lynn, the one he was married to during Suzanne's murder, who didn't divorce him until a year later, well, she finally opened up to FBI profiler John Douglas. Yes, that John Douglas. The man who inspired the amazing Netflix series Mindhunter. Go watch it, whatever you do. Now, Lynn told John Douglas that she'd met Sedley before she ever turned 16, and Sedley was nearly 25 at the time. And of course, newly widowed after Deborah's tragic death. Now, Lynn had dropped out of school and spent all her time with Sedley, who slowly but surely pulled her away from all of her family and friends. Now, Sedley was an excessive drinker, and according to Lynn, he was also abusive. Lynn said that Sedley had tried to strangle her one night, leaving her with petechial hemorrhaging, which is broken blood vessels in the eyes. She also had purple bruises and a swollen face. And then Lynn told John Douglas something chilling, that Sedley had confessed to killing Deborah, his first wife. Now, from the blogspot Criminal Misconduct, Lori Johnston writes, quote, Lynn told Douglas that as time went by, Allie eventually confessed to her that he had killed his first wife, Deborah. He said that he choked her and then held her underwater until she stopped breathing. He had undressed her body as he would his own, leaving her underwear and socks balled up in her pants inside out to support the theory that she had undressed herself. And then he placed her body in the tub with the bathwater hotter than normal so the time of death would be inaccurate. Was it true? I mean, we can't say for certain, but it certainly does paint a pattern. A man who couldn't handle rejection, a man who needed control, a man who escalated. Now, as for Lance Corporal Suzanne Marie Collins, her story didn't end with her death. She had the courage to want to be a jet fighter pilot when it wasn't even allowed for females at that time. She was full of life and vigor and determination. Her parents, Jack and Trudy Collins, turned their grief into action. They became outspoken victims' rights advocates, pushing for reform and for accountability and for awareness. Now, growing frustrated with the lengthy appeals and continuing delay of Allie's sentence, they became lobbyists for limitations on groundless habeas corpus appeals. They also established the Suzanne Marie Collins Perpetual Scholarship, ensuring her name would continue to help others achieve their dreams, which was initially awarded in 1996. Now, Suzanne was buried with honor at Arlington National Cemetery. A Marine, a daughter, a friend. Now, here's a picture of her headstone if we can switch over to my computer again. Now, she was, of course, buried with military honors. If she were alive today, Suzanne would be 59 years old, and maybe a pilot, maybe a mother, maybe a leader of Marines. But instead, she became a symbol, not just of loss, but of strength, of resilience, and of the unbreakable love of two parents who refused to let her be forgotten. Suzanne wanted to fly, and in a way she did, because even now her story still soars through the voices of those who tell it and the hearts who remember. You've been listening to Tennessee True Crime, where we uncover the stories that haunt the hills and echo the heart through the South. This episode, Death in Millington, the Suzanne Collins story, was written and hosted by me, Tiffany Morgan. Background music and theme song by John T. Productions. Produced by Main Street Media. Research support from Archives, Justia, and historical reporting from the state of Tennessee v. Alley case, as well as Criminal Misconduct, a blog spot written by Lori Johnston. Now, if you'd like to support the show, follow Tennessee True Crime on Main Street Media, on TikTok, Facebook, Instagram. And if you'd like to sponsor an episode, we would love to partner with you. Our sponsors keep our shows funded and running. Because here in Tennessee, we never stop telling the stories that matter. And some secrets we refuse to let stay buried. Tune in next time on Tennessee True Crime.
Footsteps fall where the moonlight hides, whispers over rivers, a secret lost in time. Welcome to Tennessee True Crime. Dark tales in the mountains where the mist won't lie, echoes of the fallen under starless skies. Hear the hush of memory, the voice of the unsaid. This is Tennessee True Crime, where the shadows tread.